It's amazing how ideas for videos can just come from anywhere, because the idea for this one came off the back of the community post I did the other day about the whole what if Senna survived 1994 Grand Prix 4 simulation thing. Someone mentioned a story that Senna had said to Minardi that once he was a 5-time world champion, or bettered Fangio's then record of 5 titles, he'd come to Minardi and help turn them into a front-running team, which, if true, is jolly nice of him. Someone then responded with how that wouldn't be possible because not even Alonso could work miracles there, and that same Alonso couldn't win in 2008 without cheating. To which I replied that he won at Fuji that year on merit. And I had to double check that result because I couldn't remember if it was the Japanese Grand Prix or when the Japanese Grand Prix was that season. It was, ironically, the very next race after the Crashgate race at Singapore, but while reading the report I found some bits and pieces that referenced the F1 media being highly suspicious of Ferrari getting a helping hand in that race. And not for the first time that season either. So that then begs the question, Ferrari International Assistance. What was it? How much of a thing is, or was it? And was it as bad as we all thought it was at the time? Because there is absolutely no denying that Ferrari is the team most associated with Formula 1. They've been in since the inaugural season. They haven't competed in every race. They missed the first ever race at Silverstone in an argument over starting money, and missed a couple of races in the early 1960s because Enzo was in a spat with the Italian racing authorities, something about the whole front versus rear engine thing. Ferrari is also the most successful team in terms of the Constructors' title as well. They have 16. The next is Williams with 9, and then McLaren and Mercedes on 8. Now, as a bonus fact, since the F1 Constructors' Championship was established in 1958, 15 different manufacturers have won. Vanwall, BRM, Matra, Tyrrell, Benetton and Braun are the only teams to have won it just the once. And you'd be surprised how few results you actually get when you type in Ferrari International Assistance into Google and or Reddit. Now, for all of its faults, Reddit can be a very useful place to get information because somebody somewhere knows something and they'll usually point you in the right direction of where that stuff came from. But you type Ferrari International Assistance into Google, all you get pretty much is the whole veto thing, the whole extra money thing, and the whole 2019 engine saga thing. There was also a website out there that basically just called Michael Schumacher a massive cheat for several pages. I got rid of that one, it was just too toxic. And there is a correlation between the most popular and successful players and teams and suspected helping hands from officials. Michael Jordan, Steph Curry, LeBron James getting away with travelling in basketball. Cristiano Ronaldo shunting his elbow into the side of another player's skull at the 2014 World Cup and not even getting a foul against him. Ronnie O'Sullivan criticising the World Snooker Association and getting light verbal warnings versus someone like Mark Allen who would get fined. And the fact that no referee in the Premier League would ever dare give a penalty against Manchester United at Old Trafford, especially when Alex Ferguson was in charge of the team. There's also this so-called Fergie time where suspicious amounts of additional time were added to the match that gave people the impression that this was done to give Man United a better opportunity to score a winner or equalise. And there was that thing a couple of weeks ago when that Wolverhampton player nearly had his head kicked off by Onana. Now, it must be said that this video isn't a Ferrari are cheating, FIA are biased, this, that and the other. No. I'm just going to heavily imply it across the video instead. But no, for all seriousness, this is a few examples of occasions where things have happened and people have gone, yeah, really? Or, oh, that's convenient, because there's going to be a lot of people watching this video who weren't there for this kind of thing. They might have heard of Ferrari International Assistance, but not actually realised why it was called that and the reasons why people might think that this happens, if that makes any sense. So, yeah, it's all those occasions where people have gone, that's a bit sus. Do people still play that game? Now, a few of these I've covered at length before. I've just told you what happened, but I don't think the bigger picture in terms of how that helped Ferrari, in inverted commas, was mentioned. Stuff like the 2008 Belgian Grand Prix, where Massa got the freebie of all freebies after Hamilton was deemed to have cut the chicane, only for everybody to find out he'd been penalised much later. 2 hours later, I think it was, despite all advantage he would have gotten being wiped out anyway because Raikkonen crashed out, and it later turning out that one of the stewards on the panel had a conflict of interest, since he was working for a company that did some technical stuff with Ferrari. But like I say, I've done this one before. I'll have to put one of those little cards in the top right hand corner. if I remember. But what happened as a result of that is that Hamilton dropped behind Massa in the final standings. Instead of winning, he dropped to third behind Heusinkveld and Massa, and instead of being 80 points to 70 points in favour of Lewis, it was now 76-74. But you could then argue that this was all cancelled out to a point with the whole Singapore Grand Prix stuff that's now back in the news. And I've done an opinion piece on that already. I really will have to use that card function, won't I? And staying in 2008, there was another incident that did seem to be quite weird at the time. This is at the Japanese Grand Prix, the race that kick-started the idea for this video. At the start, Hamilton was penalised for forcing Raikkonen off the road, and a couple of others for that matter, which, yeah, was a slam dunk, even if the penalty wasn't issued until lap 17. So some things at the FIA never change. Massa was also given a penalty because on that opening lap he tipped Hamilton round and Hamilton dropped to the back of the field. So once Hamilton had served the drive-through penalty and also had a pit stop for new tyres because his original ones were flat spotted in that opening corner melee, he was 50 seconds behind the leaders and any chance of getting points was now gone. But it did get a little bit more suspicious, as when Sébastien Bourdais came out of the pits after his second stop, he had the inside line for turn 1. But Massa kind of turned across him and spun off while Bourdais continued. 45 minutes after the race, the stewards had deemed that Bourdais had caused the accident and slapped a time penalty on him, a penalty that gave Massa 7th as opposed to 8th, and gained him a couple of extra points with just 2 races remaining. This meant that Hamilton's lead in the standings was cut from 7 points down to just 5, again, like I say, with those 2 races remaining. But it got a load of raised eyebrows from the media, the teams, the drivers, the ex-drivers and fans, because what had happened in the pre-race drivers briefing, Charlie Whiting had said that anybody coming out of the pit lane had right of way into turn 1, and Massa had just turned across Bourdais and spun himself out. And this also paved the way for driver stewards being a thing, a couple of years later I think it was, with Mark Blundell and those guys. Then there's 2003 at the United States Grand Prix. 2003 was also the year when that infamous "do you have to keep laughing" press conference with Patrick Head, Ron Dennis and Flavio Briatore, who were trying to explain to Ross Brawn that they'd had a year and a bit to protest the Michelin tyres, but only did so when it was clear that Ferrari was going to have a harder time winning than they did in 2002. Again, this is a video I've done before. In this instance, Juan Pablo Montoya was given a penalty considered to be a bit harsh, and this was because he was deemed to have pushed Rubens Barrichello off the road. Now this one is actually quite a tricky one because, well, we're looking at it with 2023 eyes and a 2023 rulebook, as opposed to what the rulebook was back then, so probably should go and watch it for yourself and come to a decision and maybe let me know down in the comments. Montoya had tried to go around the outside of turn 1, so he had the inside line for turn 2, but he's kept his car on the inside to try and get by Barrichello, who has turned in as if Montoya isn't even there, and Barrichello's gone round into the outside gravel trap. Martin Brundle at the time said Barrichello had got the right of way, but I look at it and I think that Rubens hasn't helped himself by not leaving enough room with that Williams up the inside. But the stewards deemed it to be Montoya's fault and gave him a drive-through penalty. And because it was raining, he lost over a lap as he had to do the drive-through and then pit for the wets, because he was driving around on the slick tyres. But just before the penalty was handed to him, JP had absolutely flown up the inside of Schumacher at the banking while the banking was wet, on slick tyres. Schumacher lifted, but Montoya kept it pinned. And that's why Montoya is my favourite F1 driver. Absolute airhead sometimes, but he was a maniac in a good way. It must also be said here in the interest of balance that Schumacher was given a drive-through in Malaysia for tipping out Trulli, so swings and roundabouts. And speaking of the Malaysian Grand Prix, this is where Ferrari International Assistance was believed to have been first coined. And this one, well, it's utterly bizarre. At the start of the 2002 Malaysian Grand Prix, Schumacher defended his pole position in a manner that might be deemed excessive by today's standards. This caused Montoya, who started second, to back off, and this allowed Barrichello to make it 3 wide on the approach to turn 1. As they entered the braking zone, Montoya slammed on the brakes and managed to outbrake Barrichello, and went to go around the outside of Schumacher. The thing is, the Michael overshot the corner and clanged into the side of Montoya's Williams, bumping him off the road and losing him several positions. Michael, meanwhile, lost his front wing. Schumacher pitted, fitted a new wing, and went on to finish third behind JPM and Ralph. But Montoya got a drive-through penalty for it. The first ever one as well. He was penalised for, well, cynics would say for daring to be in Michael Schumacher's way. But there is an interesting point to all of this that kind of takes away from the whole oh, he got a helping hand because Ferrari and the FIA type of thing. One of the members of the steward panel that day was a man called Nazir Hussain, who was one of the stewards at the 1998 British Grand Prix, where the Michael and Ferrari had executed a Giga Chad move by taking advantage of the wrong call made by the stewards, and Hussain was known for making these bizarre stewarding decisions. Long story short is that Michael should have had a time penalty for something that happened in the final portion of the race, but was given the stop go instead. But he served the penalty after the race since his pit box was after the finish line. Again, I've done a video on this. After that 1998 British Grand Prix, Hussain and the rest of the stewards panel lost their stewarding licenses for a full year, but they were obviously back working by the time that this race had happened. And the penalty was so bizarre that even Michael Schumacher said, "Why?" in German. I mean, he took responsibility. Montoya said it was a racing incident and the whole thing was a total non-issue. Now, the whole Ferrari International Assistance thing started kind of around this time, but it was either Montoya that was the first to coin it, or it was Ron Dennis that was the first to coin it. Two people that you would largely expect to be someone to put together that kind of term. Well, I mean, other than Eddie Jordan, but it is what it is. And I remember a lot of these incidents happening. I've mentioned them before several times, but just, fleeting references to most of them. But looking at them years later, now with the advantages of YouTube and more extra footage becoming available and images becoming available in this internet world, you go, well, actually, that's not as bad as I thought it was at the time. Now, some of them, and I've not mentioned all of them, do look a bit suspicious. And like I say, these are more of these are the reasons that the term gets used rather than the FIA is biased. But this is where I open the floor to you. These incidents that I have described here, if you are around the same age or older and saw these, let me know what you thought at the time. And were you sitting in front of your TVs going, "Oh, come on," or "Oh, yeah, of course," or anything like that? Because out of all of these, only the Barrichello one is a bit more, I wouldn't say iffy, because iffy implies that it was more biased than the others were perceived to be, but it's kind of like, I mean, Montoya has lobbed the car right up the inside and is partially on the grass, so yeah, they've got a point. That's what I mean by that one. I mean, personally, I think Barrichello should have left a bit more room, but I'm looking at this with 2023 eyes and the fact that I like Montoya. But you've also got the barge board thing from 1999 when the FIA was screwing up its own rules, Silverstone 1998 where they screwed up their own rules, but like I said, maybe this whole thing wasn't as, I don't know what the term to use is. Blatant? No, blatant isn't the right word. Shall I just go with iffy? So then, a look at a few instances where fans, teams, drivers and the media thought that Ferrari was given a helping hand or two from their mates in the FIA. If it's explained something that's made you think differently about it, or you've learned something new, or you now know why Ferrari International Assistance is a thing, then do like the video so I know a good job was done. And for more stuff like this, subscribe and get the bell on so you never miss out on any future videos that I do. Massive thanks as ever to the people on Patreon who support the channel at a more personal level, and also the channel members. And if you want to join the channel memberships, there's a button under the video and a link to Patreon in the description. And also in the description is a link to Discord if you just want to join in the chat there. And there's also a link to my socials and the F1 Store affiliate link as well. So you buy stuff, I get a kickback. So until next time, I've been Millward. Have a cracking day wherever you live in the world. Have a brilliant weekend, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. Goodbye.